Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I think we'll make a start, and a few people may join us as we're going. But I just wanted to say thank you first for joining us for this webinar this afternoon on After the Storm. For those of you who don't know us particularly well, Hotwire is a global tech communications consultancy, and we help clients through good times, bad times, and everything in between. So obviously, we've had quite a tumultuous time of late, and we've been asked a lot by clients, um, how should they go about planning for their communications using data and insight to help ascertain which media to use and how to think about developing programs, PR, media relations, and more broader comms as we return to what's kind of affectionately being coined the new normal. So in the next half an hour, we're going to have three great speakers who are going to talk to this topic of guiding us through the storm. If we could move the slide on one, that would be great. Firstly, my name is Chris Paxton. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for Hotwire globally. And I'm fortunate to work with clients all around the world. Some clients where we're still very much in lockdown in certain markets in the world, and then in Australia in particular, where you guys are starting to get back to some form of new normal, whatever that looks like. We're going to have Drew Usher, who's Strategy Director for Hotwire. He's going to talk to us about strategic planning and strategy, and as we come out of this storm. Then we're going to move through to Caroline, who's going to talk to us. Caroline's a program director at Hotwire, and she's going to talk to us about building programs, PR, and more broader comms as we go through. And then we're going to close with Ngaire from Isentia, who's going to use a topic that's close to my heart. She's going to talk to us about data, insight, and understanding, and how important that is as we start to look forward and as to what comes next. So that's the that's the run order for the webinar. Again, if you could just flick on one slide for me, please. So we're going to start with Drew. Drew's going to talk to us about planning in this new world. Then, as I say, Caroline will talk post-COVID PR and communications, and then Ngaire will tell us what the data tells us. There's just, in terms of some housekeeping, you should be able to ask questions as we go. At the bottom of the bar, there's a Q&A button. So please feel free to type questions as we go. I'm going to moderate that as we go through the session. What I'll do is I'll ask the panel the Q&As at the end of the session so that we get through all of the content first. And if we could flick on one slide again, please, Michelle. And if you want to join the conversation either now or after this, those are all of the channels and the handles. So please feel free to to tweet about this, to talk about it as we go through. So without further ado, I will hand over to Drew, who's going to tell us how we need to start to plan and be prepared for this post-COVID world. Thanks, Drew.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So look, this is really all about planning for preparedness post-COVID. Essentially, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about a lot of the questions that our clients have been asking us about recently, and the same three questions keep coming up. Which is, when should we start planning for recovery? How do we plan for when this is all over? And why should we re-look at our plans? Can't we just pick up where we left off? So I'm going to take you through 7 tips that I hope will help ensure brands are well positioned for the new normal. And if we can skip through one more, thank you. So my first tip is really around always keeping your North Star in sight. Your company purpose, mission, and values should always help guide business decisions in times both good and bad. And therefore, it's critical during periods of uncertainty that you stay anchored to your company's core DNA. Knowing why your company exists, how it delivers value, what its goals are, and what beliefs it holds, it really should ensure that any short-term activity that you plan strengthens your company's perceptions, reputation, and value in the long term. However, on the flip side, if you found that your company's core DNA elements have not helped you make key decisions that steer the ship through COVID, then I'd probably say it's potentially time to review your brand strategy with a new focus for the future. My second tip really is around revisiting the defined problem. because you can't solve a problem unless you've clearly articulated it. So the pressures of the current situation will have inevitably created new and different problems for us to solve. Being a specialist in tech communications, most of our clients have seen huge surges in demand over the last few weeks. And where previously that a lot of their objectives were to drive product adoption, now their challenge is actually in maintaining new levels of usage and determining which customers are in fact a priority for the long term. So in order to understand these issues, the challenges and the opportunities that are presented, I'd suggest a good starting point is to delve back into your brand listening tools to understand how new customers are experiencing your brand right now. This will likely give you a steer as to what your next problem may in fact be. My third tip is that, look, needs are changing and therefore brands must too, because people don't buy the features of our products and services, they buy the benefits, because essentially that's what's addressing their needs and wants. Because of this, the current situation, what you'll probably find is that the makeup of your customer base has changed, and therefore the needs that you're now serving may also have changed. At Hotwire, this is what we sort of call the hidden truth. It's the underlying reason why somebody wants your product or service. And if we think about Zoom for a moment, just as an example, prior to COVID, their audience was probably business professionals in totality. And their hidden truth was possibly something like avoiding the inconvenience of having to travel to important meetings. Now, however, for Zoom, their audience is seemingly everyone, and their hidden truth is to stay connected face-to-face with your network. So you can see how things have changed. So when it comes to planning future campaigns, think about who is your audience now, what are their needs now, and what are the functional and emotional benefits that you're providing. I think by doing this, you'll ensure that your messaging remains targeted and meaningful. My fourth tip is about drilling where the oil is. Good strategy is essentially ultimately about staying single-minded. We're all feeling the pinch at the moment in our business. We know that financial resources are extremely tight and that there are many demands to stretch those resources. And what will happen is, as the situation relaxes, there's a risk that we forget about choices and rush to do everything that we've been holding back. So it often feels like strategy slows us down and forces us to make choices that we'd rather not make. And this often feels like it's confining our thinking and our ideas. But we actually do this to ensure that what people see out in the world is coherent, consistent, and deliberate. So for me, after the definition of the problem, making a choice is the next and the most important factor in developing good strategy. So when you're building new plans and campaigns, more so than ever before, consider all the options first and then make a choice, no matter how difficult it is. Try to be militant about staying single-minded to that choice as you build your plans. And then finally, resist the urge to jump to a list of activities that you'd like to do, no matter how tempting it probably is. My fifth tip is about good ideas never go out of fashion, because people love ideas, not so much the data and the logic that sits behind them. So as the world returns to a new normal, just think about the sheer number of products, campaigns, and messages that will all be vying for our audience's attention. So unless you've got unlimited financial and physical resources, it will almost be impossible to outshout other competitors. Instead, I think what we've got to do is develop big, bold, and distinctive ideas. And I think now is really the time to get those sort of creative juices and those creative partners working hard. So I think if we think about our go-to-market ideas, they will either be noticed in comparison to the other campaigns that are out there, or they'll go unnoticed because of the distinctiveness of our competitor campaigns. So right now, I think brands need to be braver than they've ever been. Now is really the time to think big. My sixth tip is really to plan for the new normal. Let's talk for a moment about the principles of behavior change, okay? Because it used to be that you first had to change people's attitudes and then behavior would follow. More recently, it would suggest the reverse is true. Once people's behavior change, their attitudes will follow. And this is a means of post-rationalizing their new behavior. Why does this matter? I think is that many businesses have become even more digital, and as a result, people have adopted new digital behaviors. So it's highly likely that people will be post-rationalizing their new behavior changes and convincing themselves that it's been a change for the better. So I think assuming that people will revert back to pre-COVID behaviours after this is all over is extremely dangerous, and it could leave us exposed. I think as marketers, we have to reflect the increased importance of digital and leverage the potential of our digital footprint. And my final tip, number 7, last but not least, it's about zigging while others zag. It's about start planning for big thinking now. I think timing, focus, and bravery will all have a big impact. It's never too late to start your post-COVID planning. I think anyone that has a strategy and a plan in place early are likely to be those who benefit most. I think when you're writing those plans, stay focused. A set of loose ideas and tactics are likely to lack cohesion and the impact that you probably need to bounce back. And lastly, go big or go home, I guess would be my process here. I think in this cluttered market, now is going to be the time to be bigger and braver than you've perhaps ever been in the past. And I think those who do this are those that are most likely to reap the better returns, really. So to wrap this up, my key takeaways are really that good planning behaviours will always help you succeed, no matter what the situation is. Have a clear methodology and stick to it. This will help you consider all stages that we've discussed today. Have clear, timely, and reliable knowledge. This will help you find and identify the opportunity, I think, that will help you evolve and pivot where you need to. And be disciplined about your choices. It's better to do a few things well than perhaps do a lot of things on a limited or a stretched budget. And finally, I think the world is changing, and we really need to recognize this and use these changes to our advantage. It's been a whirlwind tour. I hope these tips have helped you think systematically really about how to plan post-COVID. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Drew. That was great. So I really like that idea of go early, be specific, think big, and act differently. I think there's something in there that we can all take out. And at the end, Drew, we may come back to you if we've got time for questions. But in the meantime, if you've got questions as you're listening to this, do type them in the Q&A. If you've got questions that you'd like Drew to answer, then feel free to just pop them in there. If we could move one more slide, if we may. So now we've thought about how we plan and the tips for planning and the importance of planning, as Drew made very clear. Landing that into execution and activation, how do we manage PR and comms in this post-COVID world? Well, we're going to find out now. So Caroline, I'll hand over to you to take us through that, if you may.
Thanks, Grace, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. I am Caroline. I'm the PR lead at Hotwire Australia. And really what I want to talk to you about today is to look at some of the changes we will have to implement when we approach comms and PR post-pandemic, so that we can make sure that we're setting ourselves up for success and continue to deliver meaningful results that move the needle for the business as well. Can we please skip one slide? So this is essentially what I want to talk about today. How are we shifting to post-pandemic comms mindset? One more, please. So what I want to start with, first of all, is to look at how the media landscape has changed in the past 2 to 3 months in Australia alone. So ever since I started in the PR industry, which is about 11 years ago, the landscape has always changed. But I think it is fair to say that in the past 2 to 3 months, we have seen significant and really drastic changes to the media landscape, and there has been so many publications shutting down, so many redundancies across the media industry. And, just I think a couple of days ago, I read in the media that News Corp has announced even more redundancies across some of their metropolitan newspapers like Herald Sun, Daily Telly, as well as The Australian. And it's really sad to see what's happening to our media friends right now. But this is something to take into consideration, because obviously when the media industry is impacted, that has a knock-on effect on how we approach PR and how we approach comms in general. One more, please. Yeah. So talking about the, I guess, the ripple effect, the ongoing ripple effect of the pandemic on the media industry. So we are seeing a shrinking media landscape, and this will continue as well, because like I think every week we're having news around some of the changes, some of the, you know, publications shutting down or broadcasts shutting down as well. So we need to be cognizant of the fact that, you know, not only do we have fewer publications, but the teams at the existing publications are also getting smaller and smaller. So, you know, they are facing heightened pressure to deliver on deadlines and, you know, just do their job basically, but also be cognizant of the fact that not only are they pressed for time, but there's, you know, they're also human. So they are all sitting at the edge of their seats right now, wondering whether they will be next on the chopping block. We are also seeing an increasing and rapid shift to online and digital strategy. Many print publications have shut down, and they're investing a lot more into their online and digital strategy. And that as well has shifted in the way that consumers consume media as well. So, you know, everyone is going more online. And I think I saw an article a couple of days ago in the AFR around I think it was reports from the Digital News Report 2020 showing that there is an increase in the number of subscription for online news. So we can see that there is a changing pattern in media consumption, and obviously this will also mean that we have to change the way we approach PR and comms on a day-to-day basis as well. The upswing in live streaming services and social media has been a really interesting one. And I think, you know, it's fair to say that this will continue to grow even post-pandemic. The likes of Ticker TV as well as Osby's, it's been really interesting to watch how it's taking off and how it's doing really well. But also social media is coming off really, really strongly and will continue to do so even post-pandemic. So we really need to, you know, put that into consideration, but also see how we can make the most out of those new opportunities, I guess, see them as changes, but also as opportunities as well for us. Sponsored editorial to make up for budget cuts and revenue losses is a reality and will continue to be as well, because let's not forget, even though we're coming out of a pandemic, we're still going to face a recession down the road. So, so we really need to factor that in, but there are ways around it, which I'm going to talk through on some of the next slides. So overcoming the challenges, it's not all gloom and doom. So there are ways around it. And I just want to share a few tips on how we can best approach PR and comms on a daily basis of that tactical level, execution level, so that we're setting ourselves up for success. Strengthening relationships with media. I know that this might sound PR 101, but it's also often undermined on how important that is. So, you know, like, as I said before, the media at the moment, they're going through a lot of changes themselves, a lot of pressure, and they're also going through a lot of anxiety about their job security right now. But like, it's really important to keep building those relationships with media and positioning yourself or us as comms professionals as an ally. And how can we help them? You know, how can we alleviate the load for them? That's kind of like a new way to approach PR and comms moving forward as we come out of the pandemic. One way that has, you know, that will be very helpful just on a very executional level is if we can provide them with fully written stories, complete with spokespeople's commentaries or, you know, industry leaders' commentaries, as well as photographs as well. If you are from the agency land like I am, that's the advantage that we have. We have access to such a big pool of executives, key industry leaders, that it's not that hard for us to do that. And by providing that help to the media, you're actually helping them, because it means they don't have to source interviews or to source commentaries from different key industry leaders. So that way you're building that relationship, you're nurturing that relationship, so that down the road, when they are writing stories, they can come to you and say, because they know they can trust you, they know that you're going to be able to provide them with what they need. So continue to build that relationship. But also, I guess it's worth noting that as we come out of the pandemic, And, you know, if things start picking up again, we will see new publications. We might see new publications pop up. But what that means is we're having new reporters, new journalists coming on board as well. So be sure that you're building those relationships with those new reporters as well. So important. Next. The second one is creating content that resonates. This one is also very important because content has always been a big part of PR and comms jobs, I guess, as a day-to-day, but making sure that you are revisiting your tone and the messaging that you're getting out there is really important, because right now, the public, right now, and even after pandemic, the public is craving authenticity, and they want to associate with brands that share the same values as them. While it's really great that we are slowly coming out of the pandemic, but once we are out, it's not going to be all butterflies and rainbows, because a lot of people, unfortunately, will still have PTSD from, you know, the pandemic. You know, some people have lost their jobs, some people are facing really dire financial strains, and some people have lost their businesses, let alone those that have lost loved ones to the coronavirus. So there will still be a lot of anxiety around, but also what that means is that it is changing the way that the public is viewing brands right now. So if you're coming across in your messaging or in your content as being tone deaf to that, then that can damage your reputation, and it will damage your reputation. So we need to make sure that we're tweaking and fine-tuning that tone and the message to come across as, you know, really genuine, but also really helpful. We want to help them. So that's another really important thing to consider. Embracing own media and social media. PR has a long time been all about earned media, but this is rapidly changing. Now, we need to find the opportunities in own media and leveraging social media as well. Just to call out some really interesting statistics or figures. So 84% of businesses generate regular business opportunities through LinkedIn. And LinkedIn makes up more than 50% of all social traffic to B2B websites and blog. So only those stats here is really to show that the power of social media as a platform, and how can we as comms, PR, and professionals really hone in on those platform, and, you know, just to deliver and broaden our remit as PR and comms professional. That's another thing that's really important for us to consider, because, you know, the whole focus of PR being solely on media relations, that's long gone, as we all know. We're now looking at a more integrated approach to PR and comms, and we will see that becoming more and more important, even as we move past out of the pandemic as well. The other thing I want to say on this slide is we're now we've been building industry leaders or thought leaders for so long as comms professional, but now there is a shift. We're seeing a shift where it is important to turn those industry thought leaders into micro influencers. And that will be the opportunity to do that post-pandemic as we embrace social media. When they have a platform and they have a really captive audience, really, how can they make the most of it? Because now it's not about how many hits you hit in the press. It's about engagement. It's about influence. So, and that social media is really the place to do that. So as we move out of the pandemic, it's really important for us to really embrace social media and owned media as well, because there's a lot of good things that can happen out of it that can really bring a really strong ROI as well, and really help, you know, whether it's our businesses or our clients, to build and grow their community. Just some key takeaways as I'm wrapping up this section of the presentation. So invest the time and effort to become an ally for the media. Continue to do that, but put more focus, because sometimes we just forget that's like PR 101 and we focus on what we consider the most important things, but this is really important. Use an empathetic and authentic tone in your comms, and review your messages as well to make sure that you're building a deeper connection with your audience. That's really important. The third point, think outside the box when it comes to content. PR has for a long time been all about earned media, but it's important to broaden the remit our remit as comms professional, and think of owned media as well as social media. Turn industry leaders into micro influencers. That is a really big opportunity to, make sure that we're leveraging those social media platforms to be able to do that and be able to put the focus back on engagement rather than it being a one-way communication. And last but not least, the PR industry has changed and will continue to change as a result of the pandemic, but it is not dead. If anything, it's, I want to think that it's really positive for us as an industry, because it just means that it's giving us the opportunity to broaden our remit even more and to push through even more so with the integrated approach to PR and comms.
Great, thank you, Caroline. I'm going to keep us moving on in the interest of time. The only thing I would say is that's probably my favorite quote so far. It's not going to be butterflies and rainbows, which makes me sad, but I guess it's very true. So we're going to close out by talking to Ngaire, and Ngaire's a big advocate for using media data to inform how your communications plans, your strategies evolve. She's going to walk us through some of the valuable trends in the media content through COVID and what they mean for us as communicators right now, and some of the issues that we should all continue to watch in the future. So over to you, Ngaire.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much. I am the Insights Director for Isentia, so my expertise is very much in media and communications research. I very strongly believe that you can learn a lot from media about how your audience is feeling and how they may respond to things in the future. And for a bit of a disclaimer about me, I'm incredibly passionate about good communication, and at my very, very core, and based on all of the research that I have done in my career, I believe that good communication is based on authenticity, and this is something that I talk about a lot. And I do think that's important to call out, because I'm an analyst and I care about bias, and I think knowing what the impact of your personal opinion might have on a topic, it's always worth knowing what the lens and the prism is through which I might be speaking. So if we go to the next slide. I want to start by covering what we saw across traditional and social media over the past few months in Australia and New Zealand particularly. So for mainstream media, what we could see in the content was that there is a real desire for clarity and organised official response. There is this constant view and comparison to the rest of the world, and especially around how governments communicate and how public information is distributed. There was obviously a concern for the economy and concern for mental health, but there was also this kind of beautiful introduction of brand new terminologies and frames of reference that didn't necessarily exist a few months ago. I am personally based in New Zealand, and one of the big new terms that we learnt over the course of our lockdown was the idea of a bubble. And obviously that's not something I would have been speaking about a few months ago, but is now this constant frame of reference that we all have. And on social media, what we really saw was the sense of community, outrage, and creativity. One of the things I always encourage people to do when looking at social media is to make sure that you are connected with outrage. It sounds like an interesting thing to care about with social, but it is a really interesting view on the world and the extremes of different opinions. So it's a really good way of making sure that you've got an idea of being able to just tap into what's driving people to emotionally respond to something. So online we could see that there was a real sense of community for personal and company well-being. People cared about businesses and whether or not they were going to be able to support them. They cared about their peers and whether or not they could support them as well. The largest sense of outrage was actually people not playing by the rules and people not contributing to the greater good. If companies looked like they were trying to flout restrictions or not doing something that was really in the best interest of this goal that we were all trying to achieve, that was a real sense of criticism and outrage. And creativity to be able to foster connection and be able to stay entertained was another huge thing that we saw. I've included some Google Trends data simply because I happen to love Google Trends a little bit, and I think it's something that if it's not in your toolkit now, make sure that it is. It's incredibly easy to use, and it gives you a really quick guide of what people are looking for and what people are being particularly focused on any given day. So in totality of the last few months, what we saw in Australia and New Zealand, what people were looking for was largely help. A lot of this was actually in the form of memes, wanting to be able to share working from home memes and connect with people in that way. People were very focused on the rules. What are we allowed to do? What are we not allowed to do? And the flip side of that is being focused on who was breaking the rules and what the potential consequence was. And obviously some tangible support queries as well. So particularly around government produced apps or government support. So the next stage that I want to cover is, from all of that information, what it is that we can actually learn right now and what we can tactically do and change based on everything we know now. I think the last couple of months have only confirmed to me that crisis communication is very much anchored in clarity, compassion, and creativity. And I really encourage anyone to go back through their crisis strategy, look at how effective you were if you needed to be, and make sure that there is this plan in place for clear foundational messaging that you can brand and amplify yourself, and have really tactical steps to be able to get to that in the early stages of a crisis, and make sure that you're centering your planning around that. The value of good communication and information has, I think, never been clearer. I think people are really, the general public is very clear on what it is that communications people do, and the importance of clear and simple communication. So now is a great time to really understand what your value is as a communication person, and make sure that you know how to translate that to your organisation in a language that they understand as well. I would really encourage everyone to evaluate your ability to read the room. Hindsight is always great. I obviously, as an analyst, deal a lot in hindsight, but I challenge you to think about any of those trends that any of us have talked about in this session. Would you have been able to see these themes as they were happening? When I talk about listening particularly, I really encourage you to go a level ahead to the idea of a brand listening tool, or being able to tap into what people are saying about you when they're talking to you. You want to be able to listen to what people are saying about things that you care about or things that you're connected to, so that you can get this view on how people are really feeling in a broader sense. The other thing that we learned was really about traditional media brands. I'm not saying that that print is going to have a revival in any way, but traditional media brands as an authoritative source and as a trusted source, I think only was reaffirmed during the last few months. So don't sideline those brands. They're incredibly important, as I think Caroline was just saying. But also don't overprivilege them. I think tuning into that emotional tone of social media and making sure that you do have this constant connection built with an audience is really important, because it's in times of crisis that you're able to connect and leverage that great relationship. And I think one of the last things I really want to talk about is where you should head and what you should consider going forward. So while we have moved from what has been a really interesting view of global crisis response in one element, we're now moving into what is essentially a large amount of social change. I would really encourage everybody to consider expanding their crisis communications plans and frameworks to include response to social issues and social change. Do you know what your organisational response would be if you were asked? And do you know what the organisational history is of any stance that you may have taken? One of the big shifts that we can see is the very direct call out to brands and organisations to have a stance and have an opinion that will become incredibly important going forward. And the other side of that is really, what is your plan for misinformation or interference with information, or some level of conspiracy? I think these things are incredibly important elements to consider when you are planning. Whether or not you consider that to be a crisis, it's worth doing that groundwork so that you have a plan. And have that plan for constantly evaluating how inclusive your communications are. audiences are constantly shifting and moving, and their emotional tenor will change quite rapidly, especially online. So being able to regularly evaluate and challenge what you think that you know. I started my little session by introducing what I know my bias is, and I really encourage all of you to evaluate that about yourself. Why is it that you think you know what you know? What is it that you consume that helps you know what you know? And challenge yourself to move out, to look outside of it. And then I'd like to talk about a few things that are worth watching, especially from a communications perspective. We're moving into a time where there will be this very interesting nationalist tension versus social change and global social change. So there's a very still in its infancy media narrative brewing around nationalist responses to restricted borders. So that's kind of in a juxtaposition with broad social discussions, particularly of racial inequality. So this will be something that I think is going to get really complex as a media narrative, so is worth paying attention to. And then this kind of secondary discussion around PR ethics and misinformation and the role of PR to correct misinformation, particularly. So I do encourage you to follow research, follow any kind of legal challenges, follow any potential regulation to social platforms, anything that may kind of connect with that issue of misinformation or conspiracy or interference, particularly, I think is really worth watching. So my final summary, really quickly, is pretty simple. It's just listen, adapt, and repeat. Make sure that you set yourself up so that you are constantly listening. You can pivot when you need to, and always keep doing it. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you, Ngaire. Again, lots of food for thought in there. I love the fact that people were searching for the rules and the rule breakers, and just keep an eye out for our outrage. What a great thought. Thank you so much to our speakers. Before we close out, there's a couple of questions that I'd like to close with, and maybe, so Jessica's asked a question specifically to you, Caroline. She's asked, do you have any advice for communicating with internal audiences? So thinking specifically about employees. Maybe I'll hand that one to you first.
Sure. Hi, Jessica. So from an internal comms perspective, I would say it's the same goes back to this whole idea around authenticity. That is really important, but with also being cognizant that, all the employees have gone through a tremendous change, having to work from home for the past 2 to 3 months. And as we get out of the pandemic, they will have to return to the office. So that's yet another wave of change. So always in your comms, in your internal comms, coming from a place of understanding and support is really important. And looking beyond just the bottom line and just profit, making sure that your employees are always feeling like they are put first and they are the priority is really important. The other thing that I want to mention here is that, having worked from home for so long, there is a really big focus on rebuilding the culture in the organization. So that as well comes down to the comms teams for different organizations as well, making sure that the tone is uplifting, that you're sharing the good news and building that culture internally again. So these are my 2 key points I would say for internal communications with employees.
That's great. Thank you, Caroline. And Drew, if I may, one for you. So you talked about organizations feeling the pinch financially during the pandemic, which they clearly have, which means that budgets have been constrained when it comes to outsourcing things like strategy, like marketing and comm services. So with these restrained budgets, the question is, what should we be prioritizing right now as we recover or kind of navigate post the pandemic? Thoughts on that?
Yeah, so look, I think a big part of strategy is about looking at the available data, the available insights, and drawing conclusions that are very focused to get us to move from A to B. So I think if you're unable to outsource some of that, I think probably my advice would be to look at what is your available data and resources that you can draw upon internally. And I think that, from a data perspective, it might be web analytics, it might be sales data, it might be inbound calls and activity. And what I would maybe suggest you do is pool all the data and start to pool resources together. So, you know, get your sales team, get your marketing team, get your data and analytics teams together, and perhaps do some form of internal analysis, be it a SWOT or something similar, and look at what is our situation today, and look at what are we trying to change from and to, like what has been the impact on our business. And if I was to sort of nut this out, I'd go back to what we sort of said in this session, which is try to stay very focused and be very selective about what you do. If you've got a very tight budget, I would say try to do less, not more.
Great, thank you. And Ngaire, I just wanted to close by asking you a question. You obviously talked about hindsight being a great thing, but it's obviously better to spot those trends, or those issues, those opportunities, those challenges, call them whatever they will as they're happening. Do you have any tips on the best way to listen to that? There's a lot of noise, and I kind of wonder, how do you find the signal in all that noise?
Yeah, I think we can get really granular in how we listen. So one of the things I constantly advise is what I was mentioning around being on top of outrage. So one of the beautiful things about social media is they make it quite easy to see what's going on and what's trending. And it sounds really basic, but check those trending pages every day. See what people are upset about and what people are celebrating, because it will give you that really broad view to be able to investigate further if it's relevant to you. I love telling people to be across what cancel culture is, and you can find it very easily by looking at the hashtags of so-and-so is over party or so-and-so is cancelled, because it's in those little events that you'll see what those triggers are, and it's that connection to that emotional tone of your audience that I think is really important to get at a high level.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Well, we're out of time. We're over time. I thank you to everybody who joined us today. Thank you for staying on for a little bit longer too. I just wanted to say a big thanks again to our three speakers. That was fantastic. Thank you for all the tips that you shared. Thank you too to my team at Hotwire for putting on the event today. I'm pretty sure we'll be following up with more details around the content that we shared with you. But I think for now, thank you everybody for joining us, and have a great afternoon. Thanks, guys.